Picture this, all right? It's the summer of 1998, out in Eugene, Oregon. You're on the side of a highway, and a teenager's car is just actively exploding. I'm talking black smoke billowing out the back, white smoke hissing through the hood, and a massive, clearly essential chunk of metal has just completely fallen out of the engine and bounced onto the road. But get this, instead of panicking, this teenager and his friends just crank up the radio and start laughing like absolute maniacs. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into Matthew Derrick's The Anarchist's Guide to Travel. Think of it as the ultimate survival manual for misfit wanderers.
And that exploding car?
Well, that was actually the author's very own incredibly chaotic origin story.
So, they ditch the smoking ruin of a car and just head into downtown Eugene. And that's where they bump into a rail-riding punk who literally goes by the name Church Key. Why? Because he carried an actual church key, a bottle opener, with him. They sit by the river, and Church Key just starts unpacking this whole underground world. He's talking about the art of hopping freight trains, hitchhiking literally anywhere you want, and finding absolute bounties of perfectly good food in dumpsters. Right then and there, a deeply rebellious tone was set. For the author, it was this total rejection of society's naysayers, and it sparked a lifelong addiction to a very specific, zero-budget, extreme way of wandering. But, okay, to really get this subculture, we first need to look at the why.
Okay, let's dive into this with Section 1, the travel punk philosophy.
So what are we talking about here? At its core, travel punk is a fiercely do-it-yourself culture. It is heavily rooted in this anarchist-leaning disdain for authority, and it completely defies your standard, everyday capitalist rules. You can think of it as operating on a sort of chaotic good alignment. The idea is to skirt laws that they feel are imposed by a system they literally had no say in building, all so they can travel the world without money standing in their way. It's a complete, fundamental rejection of that traditional career, work, and retirement hamster wheel.
As the author points out right here, travel is rebellion in its purest form. For travel punks, this kind of extreme wandering isn't just a cheap vacation, It's a deliberate, ideological mechanism. It's designed to absolutely shatter your personal limits, constantly expose you to new cultures, and drag you out of a sheltered worldview. It is all about proving that truly seeing the world doesn't inherently require some massive, thousands of dollars price tag or a pristine corporate vacation package.
Which brings us to the logistics. Section 2, essential gear for misfits.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between the stereotype and the reality. I mean, how do these nomads actually survive living entirely out of a backpack? When you picture a wandering quote-unquote hobo, you probably imagine a stick with a bandana or just a massive bag stuffed to the brim with random junk and chaos. But in reality, what they actually pack is a highly curated, incredibly strategic, multi-purpose arsenal of survival tools. Every single item absolutely has to earn its place because, well, you are literally carrying your entire house on your back.
And that brings us to the absolute golden rule of packing for the underground: 30. A traveler's pack should absolutely weigh 30 pounds or less. Honestly, ideally under 20 pounds. Lugging around 50 pounds of excessive weight is going to completely put a damper on the journey. It'll ruin it. The suggested strategy here is pretty brutal. Gather every single thing you think you need and then immediately cut that pile in half. So what actually makes the cut? You're looking at things like a plus 20-degree ultralight sleeping bag, a P38 Army can opener, a super versatile shemeg scarf, a 4-inch folding knife, which is crucial for both tools and defense, and this really ingenious DIY cooking stove made entirely out of an aluminum beer can. But listen to this. The absolute most critical item on the list is an internal frame backpack. The author shares this absolutely terrifying anecdote from his first train ride to explain why. He was wearing this older external frame hiking pack, right? When he tried to jump out of a moving boxcar, the metal frame snagged on the door edge, and it threw him into this violent series of barrel rolls onto the gravel. Yeah, so internal frames only. It is quite literally a matter of life and limb out there.
Okay, moving right along to Section 3, the economics of free food.
To really wrap your head around how these travelers manage to eat completely off the grid without traditional jobs, you have to consider this staggering statistic: 40%. A massive 40% of the food produced in the United States is thrown away before it ever even reaches a grocery store shelf. That is huge. The travel punk subculture looks at that and views it not just as a tragedy, but as a massive, completely viable resource pool just waiting to be strategically utilized.
And that leads directly into the actual mechanics of dumpster diving. Now, this isn't framed as some act of desperation. Rather, it is a highly calculated exploitation of America's food waste. The process itself is surprisingly precise. Step 1, you target food distribution centers rather than messy restaurants. Step 2, you aim for prepackaged, non-perishable goods. Think sealed boxes of cereal, bags of chips, that sort of thing. Step 3, always use your nose to check meat or dairy for spoilage. And step 4, which is the absolute golden rule of this community, always leave the area cleaner than you found it. You absolutely do not want to ruin a good spot for the next traveler. Of course, to demystify the whole taboo around dumpster diving, we really have to look at the crucial difference between a sell-by date and an expiration date. A sell-by date is simply the date when the store has to pull an item for stock rotation, just to give the consumer enough time to keep it at home. It definitely does not mean the food is actually spoiled. And that is exactly why grocery store dumpsters are routinely filled to the brim with perfectly safe, edible, and sometimes completely pristine food. But hey, dumpsters are definitely not the only option on the table. There are a few other incredibly ingenious, non-monetary ways these travelers secure their meals. You've got table scores, which literally just means grabbing abandoned leftovers at mall food courts. Or white boxes, where travelers will politely ask restaurant goers if they can have their leftovers in to-go boxes. Then there's gleaning, which involves collecting unsold left-behind produce at farmers markets right as they're closing up. And finally, joining Food Not Bombs collectives, which are groups that serve free vegan meals in city parks as a direct protest against hunger. The sheer resourcefulness required to maintain this lifestyle is honestly fascinating.
Let's transition over to our final part, Section 4, Redefining Concepts of Home.
Take a look at this highly controversial quote from an infamous and very romanticized zine called Evasion. It says, "Homelessness, unemployment, poverty. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right." Now, the author of our source material, along with a lot of modern punks, actually considers this specific mindset deeply insulting to people who are facing involuntary poverty. Homelessness is a massive, serious crisis, and the consensus here is that privileged travelers really shouldn't be playing at being homeless while making light of those who are actually trapped in that devastating situation. So the crucial point we need to take away here is the clear distinction between two very different concepts. On one side, we have homelessness, which is a serious, involuntary crisis condition. On the other side, we have what the author is actually advocating for, which is being home-free. This is a completely voluntary, ideological rejection of standard capitalist housing norms. It is a conscious, deliberate political choice to live without a traditional home base, while keeping firmly in mind that making this choice certainly doesn't make you better than anyone else. Which brings us to one final provocative thought to leave you with as we wrap up this explainer. When we look at the extreme lengths of the travel punk subculture, I mean the strict 30-pound backpacks, the highly strategic dumpster diving, this absolutely relentless pursuit of off-the-grid freedom, it really forces us to ask a much larger question. Does travel actually require a massive price tag, or does it just require a fundamental shift in perspective? It definitely challenges us to look inward and reflect on our own consumer habits, our reliance on everyday comforts, and what it truly, honestly means to be free in such a highly structured world.